Okay, so these are the three basic steps in the respiration. So that's what we're going to start to talk about. Now, which cells in plant do you think need to have mitochondria? So which are those cells that would need mitochondria? This is again one of those logical questions. And the answer is every cell. So every cell needs to have a mitochondria. The only difference would be that cells which are very active metabolically, they might have more mitochondria than other cells. But basically, all cells would need to have mitochondria. Uh, there are some differences between plant and animal mitochondria, and I already spoke about that in some botanical literature. You will see that the researchers are saying that these are not crysty. Well, actually, I also disagree with another lecturer. She is also saying, like, oh, you cannot call this crysty because plant mitochondria, they're special. However, I stand by the view that these are called crysty because these are still imaginations of the internal membrane. So you can still see that in plant mitochondria. So, you can take whichever view you think it's more reasonable. And one of the reasons the other botanists are saying that is that, compared to animal mitochondria, plants are very, very small, so they can be almost 1 to 2 microns long. And they can do something that you don't really see in animal mitochondria, and that is that they can, fuse and kind of merge together. And another thing is their outer membrane is also smaller and more densely compact. And also another thing, what you see is that, there are more coenzymes and more vitamins which are involved in all those biochemical cycles in the mitochondria. Another thing, we talk about photorespiration. So remember, we were mentioning mitochondria there as well. So when plants try to get rid of those glycolates, mitochondria is one of those organelles, along with peroxisome and chloroplast, which is being utilized to kind of try to save those two carbons from the glycolate, right? So you remember that. And then during stress, pollen can lose its mitochondria, and that can cause sterility. So what needs to happen? Like, from where do we get the glucose to start the process of respiration? So we get it from starch, which is being produced at the during the light reaction. So that glucose, that starch is being broken down to either 6-carbon molecule or the 3-carbon sugar, or even converted into maltose, because you're going to have all those transmembrane proteins which can export that. And only then that glucose can go into the process of glycolysis. There are two pathways through which you can utilize starch: hydrolytic pathway and phosphorylatic pathway. I am not going to go into details. I'm just going to tell you that in order to break those glucose molecules from amylose or amylopectin, you need to have two special enzymes, alpha amylase and beta amylase, because only alpha amylase is able to cut those alpha 1,4 bonds, and beta is cutting only beta 1,6 link glucose. So, these enzymes can only do specific jobs. So this is the simplified version of the process of the glycolysis. So what is important to know is that the glycolysis is happening in the cytoplasm. that the what goes inside the process of glycolysis. So the first product is glucose, and then the end product is pyruvate. So here you can see it's a step-by-step process through which we are trying to kind of break this glucose ring. And this is a very stable product. It's very hard to break this glucose ring. So pretty much we're just adding phosphate groups, trying to break it up. And in the end, we have to end up with the molecule called pyruvate or pyruvic acid. So if you have one molecule of glucose which is being inputted, then of course you're going to have as an end product 2 molecules of pyruvate. So this was a simplified version. This is the more complicated version because remember, plants have plastids. So as I was mentioning, see how glucose can enter glycolysis right here at the beginning, but also some of the 3 carbon sugars can enter the process of glycolysis right here where you have these triose sugars. You don't really kind of see this in the glycolysis, which is happening in the enzymes. And of course, there is energy being used in many of the places during the glycolysis. Aerobic respiration utilizes a little bit more ATP energy compared to the anaerobic respiration. Now, energy is being used, and there are only two steps where ATP is being produced. However, I would like to point out that glycolysis doesn't happen so that we can produce ATP. You will see that ATP is produced at the end of the electron transport chain. So the point of why glycolysis is happening is because we need to have pyruvate. Okay, so glycolysis is happening in the cytoplasm. It's a process of breaking down glucose into pyruvate. So the point of why glycolysis is happening is because we need to have that pyruvate. In aerobic respiration, pyruvate is of course going to go into the mitochondria and into the Krebs cycle. And then you have anaerobic respiration, which you have 2 types of anaerobic respiration. That is lactic acid fermentation, which happens in mast cells and erythrocytes. So, you know, during when you exercise, of course, you know, your muscles will go into the anaerobic condition. And then another type of anaerobic respiration is alcohol fermentation, which yeast cells are most famous for. However, there should be a continuation here because plant cells can also carry out alcohol fermentation. Now, they don't do that under normal circumstances, but what you can see sometimes, like roots are able to do anaerobic respiration. So if there is like flooding, I don't know, have you ever walked through the UB campus when it's being flooded and you think you're smelling the smell of like rotting plants, but that is actually ethanol which is being released from the roots because now they cannot do aerobic respiration, but they switched onto the anaerobic respiration. I mean, and then that's alcohol fermentation, and the end product is ethanol. And also fruits can carry out alcohol fermentation as well. So these are the 2 processes. Of course, this doesn't happen in plants, but I just, you know, give it to you here so you can see. So pyruvic acid is being converted to lactic acid in a 1-step process. And this is the alcohol fermentation, which is a 2-step process where you convert pyruvate into ethanol. So glycolysis is the process of breaking down of glucose, and then you have gluconeogenesis, which is the production of glucose, which can happen in some seeds. They're full of starch, lipids, and other types of oil. So to sum it up, there are only small amounts of ATP and small amounts of those reducing power, which is being generated in the glycolysis. Glycolysis is happening in the cytoplasm. It's a multi-step process where you break down glucose in order to have pyruvate. Pyruvate then goes inside the mitochondria in aerobic process. Okay, so we have a pyruvate that in aerobic respiration will then go inside the mitochondria, inside the matrix of the mitochondria. And in the next video, we are going to talk about Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle.